Ryan McCaffrey here. In this IGN Unfiltered interview segment with Richard Garriott, aka Lord British, the longtime Ultima role-playing game designer talks about changing the gaming world with Ultima Online, as well as his new RPG, Shroud of the Avatar. Let's take a listen. Let's shift gears again. I want to talk specifically about Ultima Online, because it's, the Ultima series, the pioneering role-playing series, they've all been enormously successful and they're revered. But Ultima Online, particularly, is 1997, if memory serves correctly, changed everything. And there was another game. There was a game called Meridian 59, which there had been things called for
MUDs.
All of us old guys. I remember them well as too. Multi-user dungeons, MUDs, but those were mostly text-based, right? And so it's Ultima Online, along with this other one, Meridian 59, were kind of the first real big deal graphical, massively multiplayer online games. But you're telling me that before we came in here, EA didn't even really want you to make the game.
Yeah,
your publisher, your /owner at the time.
Yeah, exactly. And so here's how that sort of happened. So even early in Ultimas, even before Ultimas, if you go back to teletypes, there were multiplayer games on teletypes. I mean, as long as people have had computers, and especially when they had acoustic modems, which is how most of them started, was a teletype with an acoustic modem to a central computer somewhere, people have been making these multiplayer games, including multiplayer dungeons or role-playing games. So the concept was by no means new to the world or even to us as game designers, me and my team. And so we had always wanted to make what we used to our pen name for it was Multima, Multiplayer Ultima. And every year we'd think about making Multima. But every year we'd look at the market and we decided it was not time. We really couldn't do it. And the reason why we'd say we couldn't do it, it was not technical, it was a market reason. We sat back and said, look, there were already these games on that Genie and Kesmai was making for Genie and AOL. A lot of these, probably the biggest of that period would probably be like Air Warriors. And these were games where people, when they were playing them, were still paying often as not by the minute for connection time. So they're very expensive to play, and therefore, and had very low bandwidth, and so the combination of low performance, high cost, meant you really couldn't do much of a game. And so I couldn't do a frontline Ultima with that kind of market and technical restriction.
Yeah.
But then we saw the internet starting to happen. And it was Starlong and myself who were looking at this saying, now's the time. This is the moment where access to the internet has become ubiquitous, machine power is now strong enough, there will be a market for it, let's go make Multima. And the way EA probably still does, or at least they did at the time, greenlights a game is they have twice a year or so these sessions where anybody who wants to kick off a new game can come and pitch it. And that pitch means put together a proposal. That proposal not only describes the game, it describes what technology is needed, it describes what marketing you want for it. You hand that to a sales department who gives you an estimate of the lifetime sales. If those lifetime sales justify the expense in the game, then sure, let's greenlight it. But the way they determine that is with comparables. Well, there are no comparables.
There are none, yeah.
There's none. And the closest comparables are things like that have been working on these dial-up bulletin board services, which have had a maximum of about 5,000 users. And the largest sales of anything they could even find out there to kind of rationalize a comparison with, they said, look, it might have like 15,000 sales. And let's suppose because it's Ultima, we double that. We'll give you 30,000 sales. Well, 30,000 doesn't justify any amount of investment in product development from the EA standpoint. So they were like, no, you can't do it. So we went home, hat in hand, going like, well, we think they're wrong. We came back 6 months later. It's more obvious the internet's a thing. We say, you know that game we talked about last year? We're here to tell you again this year. The data is proving the internet's a thing. You should really let us go do this. Second time, thank you, no, we're not interested. We come back a third time, and this is now 1 year later.
It's probably maybe 94, 95 at this point, I guess.
Something like that. And we come back for the third time, and for the third time we're told no. But then I actually stop, and I literally say, and Larry Probst was president of EA at the time, and I said, Larry, we at Origin, we're spending 5 or 10 million making the next Ultima, 5 or 10 making the next Wing Commander, 5 or 10 making these 3 other games. You're just wrong on this. You need to give me $250,000 to prove this. Please, and I took a piece of paper and I said, This gives Richard Garriott the right to go over budget within his development team by $250,000 to prove this Ultima Online thing. I said, just give me $250,000. And he was like, wow, okay. Signed the piece of paper, sent me away. And so that's how we started the product. And when we started it, it was also funny to see what happened development-wise. Because whenever a new employee potentially came in the door, all the teams that might want them would fight over them. And so, like if it was a super hot programmer or artist, this was the time when Wing Commander was our best-selling game. Yeah. So Wing Commander usually could find an excuse why they really needed that person. Well, the bottom of the heap was Ultima Online. And so Ultima Online was only allowed to hire people that were real specialists. Like if we hired a multi-user dungeon builder, the other teams didn't care. So we could get those people. But it also meant all the best office space went to other teams. All the obviously hotshot programmers and artists went to other teams. So we sat down and developed this little, okay, we are Ultima Online, man. We're going to make this thing happen by hook or by crook. And we spent our $250,000 and basically got to a playable demo. And then realized we had a new problem, which was how do we get people to see it? Because the internet was still so slow, you couldn't download it. It was too big to download. Which means if anybody wanted to help us test it or prove it, we had to send them a CD, which cost $5 to just manufacture and mail it. And so we thought, well, what are we going to do now? And so we actually put up what was basically, and I think it might have actually been EA's first website, but if it wasn't the literal first, it was basically amongst the first. And it basically was, hey everybody, we're the Ultima Online team. We're creating this Ultima Online thing. How would you like to come help us beta test it? But you have to pay us $5 for the privilege of beta testing it.
I did.
Because we need to send
I remember getting my disc in the mail.
Well, that first website, within its first weeks or month, I don't remember what the period of time was, 50,000 people signed up to pay us $5 to get that CD.
And they were generously giving you $30,000 as an estimate of.
As an estimate for lifetime.
Yeah,
lifetime. And so immediately that moment, that day was the day that the world changed around Origin EA, and especially for Ultima Online. It went from being the bastard stepchild that no one in the company wanted, period. It was only happening because Richard Garriott was a jerk enough to stand up and stomp his feet and hold his breath until they let him do it. And now suddenly became the most important thing happening in EA worldwide. Not only did the money coffers open, but frankly then all these managers from EA transplanted themselves to Origin to help out, and
sycophants lining up to.
So it actually, we had the opposite problem. Now it was like, thank you for your help, but please stay away. But obviously when it did ship, actually when it shipped, whatever time amount it was later, it became the fastest-selling PC game in Origin and EA history for that moment in time.
And so you could probably do no wrong at EA in that window of time.
You might like to think so, but as it turns out, not true, for interesting reasons. What we suggested that the company does right after we launched Ultima Online is we said, we need to take Wing Commander and do Wing Commander Online. And EA then said, Ultima Online did great, but we think that most likely it's because Ultima has a 20-year history and a 20-year fan base who you're building on top of. And Wing Commander was brand new at the time, and they still weren't sure online games were a thing of their own. They thought Ultima Online might have been unique. And so they thought, no, you should start right now with Ultima Online 2. And we said, but wait, if we start Ultima Online 2 right now, we're chasing Ultima Online 1's feature set that is just getting started, and it's going to, therefore, every time they add a feature, we have to add a feature, and so it will basically take forever, and we really should be doing Wing Commander Online. And we'd already started spinning up Wing Commander Online.
Yeah.
But we were told no. When they kiboshed that, the Wing Commander Online team left and went to Sony to make Star Wars Galaxies. And the Ultima Online team, which did go to Ultima Online 2, after 2 or 3 years, EA went, this is going to take forever because we're chasing the feature set of Ultima Online 1, and canceled it, which is what we told you. And so that was sort of the end of our time with EA.
Oh,
so
man.
it was actually both the peak and the end.
So yeah, we'll get to the EA drama in a little bit here, but I wanted to, I believe this year marks 20 years for Ultima Online, and it's still going. It's still going. So number one, could you have ever imagined it would still be up 20 years later? And number two, I'm curious, do you ever log into it? Does EA have the kindness to allow you to still be Lord British and be the omnipotent presence in the game.
Well, yeah. So, well, first of all, the first part of the question is, do I imagine it would last as long? Of course not. I mean, we had no idea that it would last. Obviously, I'm very proud that it has, pleased and proud that it has lasted.
Of course.
And part of my exit of EA was to separate, or even part of my joining of EA was to separate what they purchased with Origin was the trademark Ultima. What they could not purchase was my pen name, Lord British. And so when I left EA, Lord British officially left Ultima. But we have had an agreement, which is, anytime they want to use Lord British, they can just contact me. And by the way, I've always been happy to be back. So, I go back, once a year or so to maybe once every couple of years nowadays to play an official Ultima Online. And there's also all these gray shards, these side servers that people run of their own that have kind of reverse engineered the code base. And I go visit those too with some regularity.
Cool.
So I'm not a stranger to Ultima Online. I go when asked. But yeah, that's kind of one of the cool things about the communities. They're all still together playing.
Yeah, I got to figure anybody that's still in there now really cares and is invested in what's going on.
Well, yeah, what's interesting is one of the early ones, Asheron's Call, just folded its doors after almost 20 years just last month. And so the first thing we thought is, since we're developing Stride of the Avatar, we thought, oh, we should invite those people to come join us. They've lost to this big long-term world. We're big into these long-term communities.
Yeah.
Let's go look up Asheron's Call and let's see what we can do to help them find a home here in Stride of the Avatar. And so you go look at the graphics and things, look at the videos of people playing, and you're going like, wow, 20 years has been a long time in games, because and the same thing I'm true for people who look at Ultima Online. I'm just more used to seeing it on a more regular basis. But yeah, these games that are 20 years old look 20 years old, and but it's amazing that they've survived this long.
In your book, you talk about witnessing player marriages in Ultima Online. There's an infamous story, which I remember from back in the day, of Lord British getting murdered, which wasn't supposed to happen because you were supposed to be immortal. What are your fondest memories of the Ultima Online project and of that world?
Well, I think there are a couple stories that would be amongst my favorites. Would be to realize, once we launched it, it's sort of like you build this hypothetical world, you and your team of friends build an entire world with no real players in it, right? So every shop we built, every price we set, all the plumbing, tax rates, we set it all. And then you invite in 1 million people and they show up. Well, what are the odds the tax rate will be right, or there won't be potholes, or the water will turn on and off in the faucets? The answer is pretty low. I mean, the probability of it working well is low. And in fact, it didn't. So it was very broken upon launch. And one of the first things is we're here scrambling to catch up with stuff. We realized that people are both really upset and really passionate about being there. If they were upset enough, they could just quit and go away and go somewhere else. But these people weren't quitting and going away.
They cared.
They cared. They were in the game, protesting in the game. And so we're going like, that's really interesting behavior, because by protesting in the game, you're actually making the game play quality worse. but then we began to support them. And so Lord British's castle was usually locked up unless I was there to do something with it. But they wanted to protest Lord British's castle, so we opened our QA people opened the doors for them. So they all had a drunken, violent, vulgar time protesting and vomiting all over the floor of Lord British's castle to complain about how poor the quality was when a bunch of people get together in one room and bring the servers to its knees. So we let them express their discontent within the game. That was one kind of interesting thing to realize about how passionate people were about it. But another one came when I would, in those early days, I would often walk around invisibly and just watch how people were playing it, just so I could understand this phenomenon myself, just from observing it. And there was a fisherman out fishing on a coast, and he would catch a fish and set it down, and catch another fish, set it down, and that's all he was doing. And I'm just invisibly hanging out here watching. And suddenly comes this knight who's wearing plate armor and has big weapons and all stuff, and he walks by and speaking in a role play voice in text. He goes, "Oh, poor fisherman, I see you are without sword and shield. I am a powerful knight and I'm just returning from a bountiful expedition. Here, let me provide you some things to better take care of yourself." And he sits down on the ground, like a helmet and a shield and some plate mail. And the fisherman goes, "Begone, you ruffian, begone, begone." He said, "What makes you think I'm interested in your weapons of war?" He said, am a fisherman. I come out here in the morning with my straw hat and my short pants, and I sit here in this lovely weather and catch fish, and in the evening I go back into town where I sell my fish, and with the bit of money that I've earned, I sit and have a few drinks in the pub and share stories with my friends. So, be gone. And the guy goes, and picks up his stuff and trundles off. And I just was shocked. I was just so struck by that moment to realize how deeply people were role-playing it.
Yeah, that's all that player wanted out of the game.
And they both were role-playing so well.
Yeah.
And these role-playing stories just happen all over the place, and even included the player versus player PK or player killer kinds of these terms and common debates started really with Ultima Online and the Wild West that emerged when you created such a monstrosity that Ultima Online was in its early days.
So unfortunately, though, with Origin owned by EA, it did not end well. You were asked to leave EA at one point, and then you had to sit out for a year on a non-compete clause.
Right.
Do you just spend a year simmering, or do you spend a year plotting revenge for?
Oh, no. Yeah. So, well, the actual agreement was that I couldn't for 1 year go work for a currently existing competitor, and so I could have actually gone and make another startup right away. And in fact, the night that I departed, drinking heavily with friends, I went and secured the web address destinationgames.com. So that same night, we sort of set up the next company. However,
origin to destination, yes.
Exactly. And but by the way, I'd already been doing this 20 years. That was half my career ago now, and having already done this for 20 years, it was a perfectly good time to reflect. And so I actually did sit out most of that next year, not because I had to, but just because it was the right time to take a little break, take a little sabbatical. But as that year was coming up, and that year was, even though I could have put it together more quickly, it was sort of the marker that it had been set. And so 6 months prior to that year being up, I began to talk to all the old teams. Some of them had gone to other companies, some were still with EA. We began to talk about, hey, what are we going to do? Are we going to do this Destination Games thing? We began to put people together, and then this very interesting thing happened, which is that my brother and I, who were the co-founders of Origin, we both decided we'd put a couple $1 million in the bank to start up Destination Games. We'd identified the 30 or 40 people we'd want to have as our first hires. And then literally the week we announced it, so on my 1 year anniversary, which is when we were announcing Destination Games' existence, EA lays off the rest of Origin.
Well, it's great for you.
Right. So we're sitting there going, you just gave me back the company that I previously sold you. You just literally handed it to me on the day that I'm announcing my new company. So we called up all those people and said, that's actually a bigger company than we need right now, because we don't need sales and marketing and QA and customer service because we don't have any products.
Sure.
We said, however, as a company, as a totality, our value is greater than any of us as individuals. So please come join us, and we will begin Destination Games, but again, immediately looking for a partner who can make use of all these other aspects of the company. And within 2 weeks of announcing our existence, we got a call from NCSoft. And NCSoft had made this game Lineage in Korea, which had gone way bigger than Ultima Online had ever gone, but was built in homage of Ultima Online. The creator of that had lived in LA since he created it, trying to find somebody to support it in the United States, and no one would talk to him because he didn't,
different market,
different market,
world.
And, so he was making no progress. They had lots of money, but no American developers were willing to work with him yet, because again, it's just some alien Korean company as far as Americans knew. And we said, well, come talk to us. And so literally on meeting number 1, we decided to fold into NCSoft. And so I basically got to sell the same company twice. So I sold the first Origin to Electronic Arts, they gave it back to me, and I got to sell it again to NCSoft.
And then after you did work on Lineage, you made Tabula Rasa, and that went for a while and went well. But I'm kind of curious, what was it like leaving Ultima behind, both legally and creatively as well? This thing that you'd created and been with for 20 or so years at that point. Yeah,
what's interesting about that, and I even still feel that to this day, starting with the first Ultimas, Calibeth, Ultima 1, 2, 3, those are good games, but they really were just learning how to program, learning how to make a game. The first true original creation that I look back and go like, I am really proud of that moment is Ultima 4, Quest of the Avatar, where I came up with the virtues and I began to try to make my games more literary and also try to make them more original, more my creations versus plagiarizing from every other movie and book I've ever read. And so the work that I did from Ultima 4 through at least Ultima 7 is still amongst the best work I've ever done. And so when I departed EA, I thought, okay, I can go start another fantasy role-playing. I can go start another medieval fantasy role-playing game right now. And if I do, it will be immediately compared to Ultima Online or Ultima in general.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure I can beat it. I mean, I'm not sure I want to compete with myself.
Yeah.
In that way, which is why I said, let me do anything that's not medieval fantasy, anything other than medieval fantasy. And so with, you mentioned Lineage and Tabula Rasa, but we also helped bring on Guild Wars. We also helped bring on City of Heroes and City of Villains. We also did Auto Assault, a game for car combat.
Yeah, I remember that.
And so we and I were doing a wide variety of things. But it's only now with Shroud of the Avatar that I've gotten, now so much time has passed that frankly, this generation of gamers, we've got 80% of gamers are people who weren't born at the time of my earliest work, and so I have really a whole new audience to bring up to speed with the kind of games that I like to make.
But before we'll get to Shroud of the Avatar, but first I have to ask you about November 2008. You left NCSoft, except you didn't. They forged a resignation letter, which I can confidently say that because in your book you note you were able to actually successfully sue them for a nice chunk of change because they in fact forged it. They pushed you out, but you had nothing to do with your departure.
Right.
I mean, I've heard some interesting stories on this show, but especially of corporate. Let's say
malfeasance?
Yes, thank you. But that one, what's even going through your head when you see this letter from yourself?
Yeah, so
get published.
Well, but it actually has multiple levels because so first of all, before I even made my space trip, the first person I called was the president of NCSoft, and I said I would like to go to space in 3 years. But to do it, I have to sign up now.
Right.
And that means I have to start paying for it now, and I'm fixing a date in the future. And so I want to get your permission because I don't know what will be happening corporately 3 years from now. And so is that okay with you? And he said, yeah, that's fine. Go for it. And therefore I started down this path. And that's also why, during my time as the spaceflight was getting planned, I began to do things like we did this Operation Immortality, this chip that we created that we digitized lots of people's DNA, including the player base.
Yeah.
In the pictures I sent down from space, I included messages in the fictitious runic language, the Logos language, to players of Tabula Rasa. I was doing all these things to try to support the game and the company. In fact, on my spacesuit, I had an NCSoft logo on my spacesuit and things for my trip. And so you can imagine my surprise when I'm literally in quarantine, having returned from space. So
you're in Kazakhstan.
I'm back in Moscow, outside Moscow in Star City, and I'm bedridden. So you mean if you can't stand up without getting dizzy and falling down. So you're like I'm 72 hours or so back from space, and I get a call from one of the senior members of the U.S. team of NCSoft, kind of a middle manager, saying, "Hey, TJ Kim, the president, has decided it's time to part ways." And I'm like, right now? I was like, can't this wait till I get back home to the United States, out of bed? And they're going, no, right now. And I'm like, what is why? Why in total? But even I work for you. It's your prerogative. If you don't want me to work for you, okay. But why can't you just wait 2 weeks for me to get back home after this thing we all agreed that I was going to go do? And they were like, no, it's right now. And they said, we've already drafted this letter to announce your departure. And as with most letters, when an executive departs, it says, departs to go do their own thing, right? It doesn't say you were fired. It says they go to do their own thing.
Explore new opportunities.
Go explore new opportunities. And so they sent me this generic letter that their PR team wrote, and said, here's the letter we plan to release. And it was like, well, I can't stop you. I work at your leisure, so whatever. So I'm expunged from the company. I come back to the United States. Then what the lawsuit is specifically about is they then tried to say that letter, which supposedly I wrote, meant that by quitting versus being fired, they could cancel all my stock options. To which I then said, wait a minute, I didn't quit, you fired me. And they said, no, we didn't fire you. See, the letter says you quit. I'm going, no, that's not how this works. And they tried to say, oh yeah, we would never have wanted to fire you. We actually loved you as an employee. And I said, well, wait a minute. You actually did call me up and insist, and we actually took depositions from TJ Kim, their president, and this person who supposedly, heard me call in from my sickbed to resign. And what's interesting is they had emailed each other. So those emails are part of the record. And so the email record shows that TJ said, I'd like you to get Richard out of the company. And that's what he did. And then they put depositions, to their lawyers that said, no, we love Richard, we would never told him to leave. So they literally in court lied, even to their own paper trail, which is why they lost the court case, is because there was fortunately a paper trail that shows exactly what they did. And so they lost in federal court first, and then they went up to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, where they lost also a second time. And what's interesting about going to court is, first of all, it's very scary going to court. I mean, I don't, it was really no fun. And so despite the fact that I was victorious.
Yeah, when there's that much money, not to mention probably your reputation is somewhat on the line there,
absolutely.
too.
So this was, again, this was the 2008 market crash. So if this was basically wiping me out again, even with the stock options, it might not have been. At 2008, they were basically worth zero, at the time. So they were wiping out something that at that moment was worthless anyway. But the when you go into court, you realize very quickly that whoever has not only do you want the truth on your side, but you also need really good lawyers. And fortunately, I had really good lawyers. And but for example, when we went into the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, there's not a jury there. In this case, it's a 3-judge panel. And my lawyer said, Richard, before we go into court, those 3 judges will know this case. Don't doubt that they don't know every word. Also, when we're going to get 15 minutes to talk, they're going to get 15 minutes to talk, and that's the end of it. And they will challenge what either side says. Don't take that as a bias one way or the other. Their job is to dispassionately challenge everything. Mm-hmm. And so we shouldn't, when you walk into this room, don't expect to believe you know how they're going to rule. So our guys got up to give our side. Judges listened and nodded and listened and nodded. No questions. It's like, that's interesting. The other side gets up, starts to make it, and they get challenged. Every line they say, they get challenged. And I'm going, I kind of feel how this is going. And in fact, got the order went. They went first, and we went second. At the end of ours, finally one of the judges went, that's a problem. And our lawyer stopped and said, what's the problem? He said, oh, not for you, for them. And so we walked out of the Court of Appeals going, okay, we knew we were going to win this one. But yeah, it's it's a very expensive, very scary, very time-consuming period of time that I wouldn't wish on anybody.
Well, at least, so you are vindicated, and now we move to present day, working on Shroud of the Avatar, which, is it fair to call it something of a spiritual successor to Ultima? It's that sort of...
Oh, it's very fair. I mean, I use those terms precisely. While there's nothing we've brought forward, directly out of Ultima intellectual property, it has the Lord British design guidance to it. So, one of the things I think separates my game still from most role-playing games, is most role-playing games, most MMOs are level-based. They're games where you start wimpy and you end up powerful. Yeah. There's a level-gated area of exploration where you have to become a higher level before you can continue to explore further into the world. And even if your character might have other roles like crafting, everyone who's playing is first and foremost a combatant that might also do crafting on the side. And in Ultima, the world itself is incredibly highly detailed. So every object you can see, you can interact with. If it looks like something you should be able to open or close or operate, it will operate as you expected, or it shouldn't be in the game. while lots of people are combatants, there's no level gating of the world. You can explore everything all at once.
Yeah.
And there's tons of just role-playing classes that really never get involved in combat. And so you can have a very rich life as a role player, even if you never engage in combat.
Nice.
And so those truths, plus stories about virtue, as opposed to just about bad guys, are sort of the core of what I like to put in our games and what we've done with Shroud of the Avatar.
And it's been you've had a very sort of open development process. You've had players in for a while. When is sort of the finish line in sight for Shroud of the Avatar?
Yeah, well, what's interesting about that is being an online game, and especially being a crowd-funded online game, we are up to release 38. Actually 39 launched today, yesterday. And so for 39 months in a row, we have released on the third Thursday of the month in exactly the same time, within plus or minus a minute. And for most of that 38 months, the servers have been live 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So anybody who wanted to has, you could say we're already commercially launched. We've been commercially launched since we had a room with a chair, a torch, and a chicken. We called it the chicken room. Since the chicken room, we have been live. That being said, last summer we went through a big milestone of persistence, so no one's character's being wiped. This summer, July, is sort of the first even bigger deal, which is the story will be completed. You'll be able to actually start the game and finish the game, we believe, in July. Yet, there'll still be a few features and fine-tunings that may not really be where we want them in July, so sometime later in the year, we might have yet another time we call it launch. So we sort of have 3 moments, last summer, this summer, and later this fall, that are sort of our launch events. So depending on who's asking or why they're asking, we would advise them to wait for one of those milestones.
So before I let you go, I have just a couple more quick questions, because I think it's not unfair to say you are a Hall of Fame caliber role-playing game designer. So I'm just curious, who do you look up to or admire in the game design world, either past or present?
Well, quite a bit. It's interesting that even I would expand. I get most of my inspiration not from other role-playing games. I get them actually from other lines of other areas of work. So Will Wright is somebody whose work I've always admired, and for one reason is the diversity of his creations. I sort of feel like a one-trick pony in a sense of I can do role-playing well, but I don't think I could make, and even there's some kinds of role-playing I don't think I'd do well. I could never have made World of Warcraft. The fine-tuning of the combat reward cycle that I see in Blizzard products is beyond what I do in my own. But I do these deep sandboxes with virtue stories in them, I think, pretty well. What people like Will does is, he can invent whole new genres that are different from each other during different periods of his life, and I don't have that skill. So I love to see what he does. The Doom Quake series, another one that I find inspirational.
Do you talk to John much over the years with Armadillo Space? With
yeah,
him,
of course.
You guys bond over space?
Yeah, so exactly right. So admittedly, I have a double soft spot for John because of our mutual shared interests. And in fact, even with him, not only the work he does with 3D, but let's just be moving over to the rockets. He's another person where it's hard enough to keep what you're doing in a game in your head. If you want to sit down and do rockets also, there's a whole nother set of kind of math, shall we call it, that you have to keep in your head. Which is another reason I'm a real big admirer of Elon Musk. You sit down to Elon, I think I do the game parts pretty well, but I need a business partner. I need my brother, although he's now retired. My wife's fortunately good at business. I have other partners who are good at business. I have to have a good business partner, or I will put myself out of business.
Yeah.
You look at people like Elon, and he can not only do the business side, but also all the engineering, and not only of spaceships, but also of cars. and when you sit down and have a conversation with him, or I'll go back to Carmack in this case, they know those systems in incredible detail. They can not only tell you the decision they made, but why. And since this is also my passion, I can challenge them on it, and they can tell me why my thinking is kindergarten, on whatever my challenge is. And so, but anyway, so yeah, there's a wide variety of people and games I'm a big admirer of, but they're rarely directly in my own field.
Where do you think the RPG genre is heading in the next 5 or 10 years?
Well, I'll answer that by even saying what I think that all genres are headed. So one of my pessimisms about the gaming industry is a problem that is created by the success of the increase in CPU power due to Moore's law. I look at the first thing I ever saw that inspired me. There's a little game called Escape. Escape with an exclamation point at the end of it, on a cassette tape for an Apple II. And it was a low-res block graphics game. There was nothing but it would draw a maze, drop you into it in sort of 3D, and you just had to get yourself out. That was it. And that's what inspired Akalabeth. But it was sort of also like a first-person shooter in a way, except nothing to shoot. Just walk through until you get out. Well, as technology improved, those graphics get better. The weapon variety gets better. The character classes get better. But what happens is that every time there's a new breakthrough, like if you're going back to all the beginning, a floppy disk, the 5¼ inch disk, the 3½ inch disk, hard drives, CD-ROM, 3D hardware, the internet. Every time one of those things happens, the very best-selling games that exist during those radical moments of increase of power are simple first-person shooters that have really great bells and whistles that no one has ever seen before in gaming. And between those moments, to compete with the most recent giant first-person shooter, games need to become a little deeper. They go like, okay, it's not enough just to run around and shoot in a maze. Now I need portals, or now I need med packs, or now I need a variety of weapons, or now I need character attributes, or now I need conversation. But then as soon as we get over another big heap, gameplay simplifies again to being not very deep. That's my interpretation of, so far, the total history of games. And I see no reason for that to change as long as Moore's law keeps making the bells and whistles so powerful every few years. And so I think the majority of best-selling games are going to remain the thinly, light role-playing placed on top of heavy first-person shooter technology. That being said, that's neither what I like to play personally, nor what I like to create personally. I like to create something that I feel is a little bit deeper, has a little more story behind it, that isn't as efficient. The nice thing about a challenge reward game like World of Warcraft or other things that are level grindy is you make one system to where all I can do is make weapons get a little tougher, monsters get a little tougher, and I can make a system that lets you rise through your period of gameplay. If you're going to try to do something where each plot point is a unique piece of code, it's no longer one system that gets harder. It's now 20 unique pieces of code, and the cost goes way up. So making deeper role-playing is more expensive and does not result in lots of new bells and whistles. And so it's difficult, I think, for it to emerge with the same oomph as first-person shooter technology variants do. And so as a player, I'm always hoping for and pushing for and evangelizing for this deeper, for we were earlier today talking about games versus movies. When you look at movies, most movies aren't quality. Most movies lose money. But amongst the pantheon of movies that make money is an incredible diversity of things that are documentary-like, horror movies, adventure movies, and a large number of movies. In fact, whether or not they're horror, or adventure, or anything else, the ones that speak to you deeply as a person, as a human, are often the most successful, and the ones that you'll go, those will stand the test of 100 years of time. That will reflect on them and go, that was a great moment in history. Games so far don't do that much. Games are mostly level up and kill monsters, and when they try to make a movie based on games, they still universally are pretty terrible because there's not much meat on the game to really justify a particularly compelling story, I would argue, in most games. And so games are not particularly literary compared to movies and books yet, but that's when I think we'll come of age. But that coming of age is still dependent on solving the Moore's law problem. Solving how either we can let that continue and still make deeper games, which is happening some, or there's a leveling, or the machines become so powerful that's no longer the challenge. Once the reality engine is so good that's no longer the problem of making the game. So the really way to differentiate myself is to make a game that's deeper. But as long as bells and whistles are the thing that differentiates why I'm excited about the new game that I just saw an advertisement for on television, that's our challenge.
And that was just one of the fascinating topics I spoke with Richard Garriott about. Be sure to check back each and every week for a brand new segment on IGN Unfiltered.